Welcome to Fight News Now Extra. I'm John Pollock. We have John Ramdeen and Robin Black joining us as we talk lots of news coming out of the world of mixed martial arts, including cards being rearranged, a new home for Rousey and Zingano, TUF Brazil coaches have been announced, and lots more, so let's get started. It was announced on Wednesday by the UFC in Brazil that Anderson Silva and Mauricio Shogun Rua would be coaching the 4th season of TUF Brazil, which airs on Globo next year. Unlike most seasons, Silva and Shogun will not be fighting at the season's conclusion, and filming will not begin until after each of their next fights, as Shogun meets Oven St. Preux next weekend in Brazil, and Anderson Silva will be taking on Nick Diaz January the 31st. Over 600 lightweights and bantamweights showed up for the tryouts this past week in Brazil. The women's bantamweight title bout between Ronda Rousey and Kat Zingano has been moved from the UFC 182 card on January the 3rd to a February 28th date in Los Angeles for UFC 184. Dana White was the one to make the announcement, and the card will feature a pair of title fights, as Chris Weidman and Vitor Belfort will also be fighting on that February 28th card for the middleweight championship. A lightweight bout has been signed between Donald Cerrone and Miles Jury. Originally, it was scheduled for the January 18th card in Boston, but later in the day, it was moved to the January 3rd show at UFC 182 in light of Rousey and Zingano being taken off that card. And finally, another lightweight bout is set, with the Boston Herald reporting that Eddie Alvarez will meet former lightweight champion Benson Henderson on January the 18th in Boston on the same card that will be headlined by Conor McGregor and Dennis Siver. Alvarez made his UFC debut this past September, dropping a decision to Donald Cerrone, while Henderson is coming off a stoppage loss to Rafael dos Anjos and has indicated that he is considering a move up to the welterweight division. Here with John Ramdeen and Robin Black, lots of news to dissect. We have two big lightweight bouts that have been announced, Donald Cerrone and Miles Jury, which in the course of one day changed cards. Ronda Rousey, Kat Zingano now is at the end of February with Chris Weidman and Vitor Belfort. And maybe the most interesting of all of them, Eddie Alvarez will have his second UFC fight against Benson Henderson. And this is interesting because John Crouch had suggested that Benson Henderson might fight one more time at lightweight and then make the move up to welterweight at this point. Do you guys like this fight? And for Eddie Alvarez here, is this a must-win for him?
As a fan, I love every time Eddie Alvarez steps inside of the cage. He brings it. He's always in shape. He can take a lot of punishment. And Eddie Alvarez, for the most part, always finds a way to win. The problem is, as you mentioned, he's facing a big guy in Ben Henderson who knows how to steal victories away from people. A lot of people believe that Frankie Edgar was robbed in his fight and that Josh Thompson was robbed in his fight. Ben Henderson has a strategy and has a game plan to send a message to the judges that I've won this fight. And if Eddie Alvarez goes down 2 fights, I would expect that he's going to go down to 145 pounds.
Yeah, there's a lot of reasons this fight's super cool, and you guys have already touched on one of them. You got Henderson's a huge lightweight, and Alvarez says he's a big lightweight. He says he cuts a lot of weight, but when he comes in at fight time, you saw how much smaller he was than Cowboy. He's on the smaller end of it, but he has trained a ton with Frankie Edgar in the past, and he has that same strategy. The reason I like the fight is because they're opposites in a lot of ways. Eddie Alvarez, I created a scale, the SAP Alvarez scale, that measures your willingness and ability to take damage and experience damage and stress in a fight, and your risk-taking behavior. Alvarez at the top of that combination of skills. And in the world of champions, I think Ben Henderson's very low. He's a -5'5". He's not a risk taker by any means. And he can probably take a lot of damage, but he puts himself in a situation where he doesn't have to. He's not willing to create situations where he has to. Two totally different guys, totally different styles, totally different ends of the weight range, and we end up having a really, really cool contrast of styles as a fight.
And also to throw into the equation is that Benson Henderson, we've really seen him flourish over those 5-round fights. This will be 3 rounds for Benson Henderson, and if that alters his game plan at all,
pedal on the gas. Yeah,
we'll find out. Now, Miles Jury and Donald Cerrone, however, they will now be added to the January 3rd card, and this is just a case that, hey, we have all of these cards, and maybe Rousey and Zingano are better suited for February 28th. Jones and Cormier are certainly carrying the pay-per-view in January. But Cerrone and Jury, this very well could set up the next lightweight challenger for the winner of Anthony Pettis when he takes on Gilbert Melendez in December.
I think on paper, I like this fight. I think, you look at the future, being Miles Jury at 155 pounds. We know how talented he is. He comes out of that Alliance camp in San Diego with Dominic Cruz and Phil Davis, very, very talented individuals. I just happen to think that this might be a tad too soon for Miles Jury. I think that it's a huge jump up to face Donald Cerrone, who really seems mentally strong right now and really could defeat anybody at 155
Isn't Miles Jury like 15-0?
He's like 12-0?
Yeah, I mean, he's a lot in O. And at some point, you got to face top guys. He wants this fight. This is a top guy. If there's a way to beat Cerrone, it's with a certain strategy. We saw Diaz do well against him. We've seen guys do well against him, kicking from the outside of distance. Jury's going to look and try to find a way to beat this guy. If he wins this, you're legitimately top 5 being considered for the title. It's a risk he's willing to take at this stage of his career. This is a killer fight too, man.
Also, let's touch upon the fact that Anderson Silva and Mauricio Shogun Rua, they're going to coach the 4th season of TUF Brazil. They had a huge turnout for this, and maybe TUF on the international scale still lends itself to that format, but at least domestically, as we're currently in the season right now where they're creating a champion, I almost think that it's going to be very tough to go back to all these unknown prospects that are going to be vying for UFC contracts. I think after this season, they really have to sit down, I think, and look at this format. Maybe of our 500 guys on this roster, we take some of the lesser-known guys, let them go on this show, so I know who some of these guys are that are typically reserved for your lower-end prelim fights.
I agree. I think that's what it's. You should take a look at the comeback, Ultimate Fighter Season 4, guys that were in the UFC or that made an impact at one point, and bring those guys back because you have a built-in storyline, and I think you need to go with it.
They're smart people over there. They know what they're doing, but yeah, it's a weird one. TUF is almost not for us anymore. You can watch it. It might be fun. Some of the episodes will be good, but they're to try to create an audience who watches The Biggest Loser and these other shows and get them to go, oh yeah, I'll watch the UFC sometimes. But Pollock makes a good point. There's 500 of them. There's 400 we don't really know. Then we keep adding 20 or 40 or 60 every year with the international
and
ones.
the idea of getting a UFC contract, not what it meant in 2005.
Very
it's very
true.
different in 2014. For Robin Black, John Ramdy, and I'm John Pollock. Sit back and catch more of Fight News Now Extra.